I'm also going
Yeah.
to tell you another fun fact about me, which is that I am pretty well accent blind. So until you
Oh, wow.
mentioned that you were from Scotland, I had not noticed.
Nice.
That's
Incredible.
amazing.
I love this.
I know.
That's crazy.
So,
Wow.
Hey, welcome to Beer Christianity. My name's John T.
I'm Laura.
I'm Malky.
and I'm Naomi.
Hey, Naomi. Welcome to Beer Christianity. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Do you want to tell the listener, the listeners, the many listeners, the
Listener.
legions of fans?
Yeah.
Hey, when I first trained in radio, they said you must only talk to one person, as if
Okay,
it's one
but
person listening.
We should
'cause
also have confidence in ourselves.
absolutely, that's true. Do you want to listen to the literally tens of people listening to? Do you want to say explain to them who you are and what it is that you do?
I am CEO of the Student Christian Movement, and SCM is a movement of students being. Oh, that seems really obvious thing to say. The Student Christian Movement is a movement of students. Wow, I
No!
should be better at saying that, shouldn't
You
I?
heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen.
What's the first time I've fallen into that verbal trap? It is not. So we're going to talk a bit more about SEM later, I expect. But we are students who are progressive. Our organisation student led, and we're all about putting faith into action. I'm also an Anglican priest, and I co-lead Progressive Pioneer Church, which is like super inclusive and affirming at Coventry Cathedral, and I lead that with my partner Charlotte.
Fantastic. SCM, you're saying putting faith into action. What does that look like?
So it looks like different things for different students, because the reality is that that being student led means that you go where their individual discipleship is taking them. But a lot of the time it's about social justice and looking at what other things in the world and in the church that young people's voices can make a difference to, and sometimes even where you don't think you can make a difference, speaking out the truth and and saying the right and righteous thing, even if you don't think it will make a difference. And so sometimes that's about big national campaigns. Sometimes that's about acting locally on campus. Sometimes it's about reading the works of Bonhoeffer and learning the theology behind a faith that calls us into into social action. And other times it's about making a cup of tea for the lonely friend down the corridor.
And has it always been that way? Did it kind of start as a social justice thing, or has that kind of evolved over time?
Oh, I'm so happy you asked me that, because I love talking about SEM's history. So because we've always been student led, exactly what that's looked like has looked like different things over the years. But right from the beginning, it was a group of students that set SEM up in 1889, and they started by getting together and praying, and they did various things, and the really kind of clear message that kind of got repeated, and they had lots of talks about and wrote about kind of in the early days, was about the fact that here are a whole load of bright young people who are away at university, having their minds expanded into critical thinking. But at that point in time, the church wasn't offering lay people, particularly young lay people, but really any lay people, the opportunity to put their critical thinking into the service of their faith. And so SEM was about doing that. And right from the beginning, it led people to doing stuff. So the very, very early days, for about a minute, we were there were people went overseas and engaged in overseas mission, like particularly in education, and particularly young women went and taught in schools overseas. And obviously that's a kind of a slightly complicated beginning to history that and something actually that we're launching a project about to interrogate our history and think about what we do with remembering that. But very quickly, it became about facilitating the turning their wise minds to faith and what that could mean in terms of the student experience where they were. And so groups around all around the country, right from those early days, and they would basically, in different generations, they've done different things. And I always say that we never built an empire. We'd do something for a while and then we'd give it away. And so early work was massively about ecumenism, when ecumenism was a really new idea. So the SCM was really engaged in the missionary, in the Edinburgh Missionary Conference, which was instrumental in setting up the World Council of Churches. And then in the kind of 1920s, there was nowhere for lay people to go together to study the Christian faith. So the students then raised money and they bought what became a Christian conference center, a big house that became a Christian conference center, which is still a Christian conference center today. And some of your listeners might have heard of it. It's the Hayes, but it's colloquially known as Swanwick. And for decades and decades, it was ours. But the thing is, then other people were doing that, and so they moved on. And nobody was translating the great German thinkers of the mid-century into English, and so they set up SCM Press. But by the time it got to the 80s, I think it was, other people were doing that kind of Christian publishing, so it wasn't necessary. So they gave the press away, and moved on to campaigning for anti-apartheid. And through the generations, that what SCM has always done. Those are some of the highlights. I'm sure they've also done, there are students who've done sort of things that have been lost to history because they didn't turn into something really cool that I can summarize. Like, I don't want to say that the whole of our 130 something years has all been magical and perfect, but it's always been quite an itinerant kind of thing. They're always kind of moving on, or nomadic would perhaps be the better a better way of thinking it. Actually, each generation of students pay attention to what the world and the church needs from progressive theology right then, and that's what progress means. So what next? And hugely in recent years, that's been a lot about LGBTQ plus formation. People have been writing and speaking at SCM about what was originally our old magazines call it gay liberation, back in the 70s and 80s. And nowadays, like one of our theological powerhouse at the moment is a group called the Trans Theology Group, and they're meeting tonight actually. They're not all we do, but it's really interesting that in a moment when the world is turning on trans and non-binary people, there's a group at SCM saying, okay, well, that's terrible, but also where is the joy in the trans experience, and where is the theology, and where is the thing that God is saying to us that other people could do with hearing and that we could do with affirming in one another. So that's kind of where we are at the moment.
So that on that final issue that they were just discussing there, certainly in the world and in the online space, that's a hugely kind of contentious and combative area. Is that the same for students on campus? Is it the same within like Christian students on campus? Is that something that you experience? Really
good question. One of the risks of getting the CEO rather than a student member is, what do I know? I'm not on campus. So like if there are students listening and they're like, no, Naomi, you are wrong, then, please feel free to tell me. I don't hear them saying to me that they get a hard time from their fellow students. From churches that they wander into that appear to be welcoming and then turn out not to be. And I could maybe say some more about that because we have a big campaign about that. But Yes, so churches are a problem. Not all churches, thankfully, but some churches can be a problem, and obviously the societal stuff. Um, yeah. So, but I can't actually think of an occasion where I heard a trans student talking about a specific kind of on-campus abuse. I'm sure it happens, but I don't think that's the center of where the agony is right now.
The campaign, what is that?
Oh yeah, so we have a campaign called Honest Church, which has really here in the UK really caught the imagination of the folks that we've managed to get that message to, and has actually been a really good thing across conservative and progressive churches, and also really engages churches in the middle, and I think that's really important. So on the whole, without any question, SEM wants every church to be affirming. There is no question about that. But we recognise that's not where we are. And while it's not where we are, the reality is that students have, in the classic student experience, which of course is not every student's experience, but in the classic university experience, there are two moments where you need to find a new church. At the age of 18, when you rock up to university as an undergraduate, and then on graduation, when you go and do your first job post graduation. And in both of those moments are incredibly vulnerable moments for a young Christian, because they're in a new city and have to walk in and try out a church and see whether it's going to be home. And when you're immediately laying both your personal life and your spiritual life on the line by doing that. And of course, there are a lot of churches that put a huge amount of effort into doing a student welcome, and will put up a big sign saying all are welcome, and give out free pizza, and are just so lovely. And there are a load of other young people and people, and as a young Christian, it can be incredibly isolating, and so it can be really exciting to find that there's a bunch of enthusiastic young Christians at a church. So you start going for a couple of months, and then they're asking for people to join the music group. So you offer to join the music group, and then the pastor says, let's go for a coffee. And let's go for a coffee is code in our world for, let me tell you about what's wrong with your, inverted commas here, lifestyle choices. And obviously you understand that, with your lifestyle, you can't be in leadership. You're really welcome to be here. We're not asking you to leave. And I would hear over and over and over again the crushing experience of having thought you found somewhere to belong and then discovered that your whole self's not welcome, or that your queer friends aren't welcome. And going and finding another church after that is really hard, and it makes me so angry, and I think it is so profoundly unbiblical, because it's putting a stumbling block in the way of young Christians. And when actually, if those churches were just honest off the bat, and I mean, even better if they were able to say, but there are other churches in the city where you would be welcome. But Honest Church isn't even asking for that. It's just saying, can you say something? Just something. There doesn't have to be a specific form of words, but just something that is really clear to a young Christian who maybe grew up in a church where they have always been affirmed, and their identity has grown with the congregation that they've been a part of growing up. They don't necessarily know the code words. They don't necessarily know that Bible believing doesn't mean, oh yeah, no, I believe the Bible too. Great, that's my place. No, it doesn't mean that. It means that your that your whole identity is maybe not going to be affirmed here. And the thing that I would say to those churches is, if you've got confidence in that, don't hide it, because hiding it hurts people, and nobody can suggest that dishonesty is Christian. That there is no case for that. So let's tell people the truth and let them find the church where they can thrive. And but the thing is, it isn't just those are the obvious ones, but then there's also the churches in the middle that don't say anything at all because they think, oh well, we've never really talked about it. But but obviously there's Jeff and his husband Mike, and and Jeff does the sound system, and everybody loves them, and we really like the cake they bring, but we just don't talk about it, and we certainly don't go on pride marches, and so we're not good enough to say we're inclusive, to be signed up to the inclusive church list, or to put a rainbow outside, and so then they say nothing. Then how would the student who was just wounded by that other church, how would they know this is a church which actually might be quite a lot like the one they grew up in? So say something. And then equally the churches at the most progressive end, the most like thought through affirming end, even there's a variation that kind of a smaller distinction between churches which are very full of queer people and churches that are very full of allies. And depending on who you are and where you're going to flourish, you might need one or the other. And just saying something is just so helpful. And the thing that has been really amazing is that we've actually met quite a lot of graciousness from conservative Christians about this. And really very little pushback. And I have so much respect for that actually, so, I'm not suggesting that they're all whacking the Honest Church logo on their websites. But they have been prepared to engage with it. And so we have an Honest Church website where there's lists of questions that the students might want to ask to help work out before they settle in a church, whether it's one that's going to suit them. And likewise, questions for church leaders to think through, to kind of think about what's the kind of stuff they could say that might help to signal to folk what their welcome is like in reality. And it's definitely having some impact, and it's a good conversation.
It sounds like a quite complicated conversation to have, particularly with churches who are branding themselves Bible believing, which is the greatest weasel term, and also it's just such a weird I've been in many churches that I've had really good formative experiences in that called themselves Bible believing, but it's just such a weird flex in terms of, not like those other churches who say screw the Bible, because all those churches that do that, like, so weird.
Yeah, it is a really weird code, and if you didn't know what it is they're trying to signal, it is just a really weird phrase, because like I take the Bible really seriously, like and wrestle with it. I think being a progressive Christian is hugely about that. Is let's not let Scripture get away from us, and let's look at the really hard stuff and work on it together, and be prepared for it to change us, and to have our minds changed about stuff. Yeah, but and it's okay that that's not the same thing for everybody, but be honest about it. Actually, the thing is that we have members of SCM who go to all different kinds of churches, that you can't necessarily guess that it might be that they say, oh well, actually queer folk can't be in leadership here, and actually somebody decides to settle there anyway because it's not the main thing for them, and that's different than being lied to. Than actually making an informed choice and saying, well, yeah, but actually I have a disability, and getting across town to any other church is really hard. So now I come aware that there might be some sermons I want to skip, but actually I'm prepared to do that because I'm an adult and I'm armed with the reality of what this church is going to be like. And actually what I want is to be able to go and worship on a Sunday. And that's a totally valid choice. And we should give people the chance to make that choice.
Yeah. Or I dig the music and I just know I can't go there on Remembrance Sunday. Just saying that, saying for a friend, not for me at any point, of course.
For example.
Naomi, what's been your kind of faith journey, and has it always been in one of those lovely progressive churches that you described?
Oh well, I used to have a joke with a colleague that that there's a whole description of church that is missing from our lexicon, and that is village. Um, so, so I grew up in a village, and we went to the local Anglican church, and I'm very dyed-in-the-wool Anglican. It's just a really strong part of my identity, and you know when you can't work out what's nature, what's nurture. I don't know. I don't know if it's just because it's where I grew up, or whether it's because it just does really fit me. And for all the Anglican churches, like there's so much wrong with it. But it's my family, and there it is, like for good and for ill. It's part of who I am. But the church itself was a massive mix. And boy did we still have drama. I mean, we had a whole bunch of people leave the church and go and set up an independent church. Which then met in the local school. So like a whole load of like the people whose kids I babysat for and who were friends with my parents. They all upped and left the church to go and be more charismatic somewhere else. But we also had matins on a robed choir. And and mostly what we had was community. And I think that first and foremost for me, church is community, and it isn't about a particular worship style. I went to St John's, Nottingham, which was an open evangelical theological college. So I went there when I was 22. And I really went there not because it was evangelical. But also evangelical, I mean, this was in the late 90s. Evangelical didn't mean then quite what it means now. Um, it, it yeah, it was just kind of like modern. It was modern worship, and the Bible's a good thing. But it was very much. I chose it because it felt like they'd trained me to be a vicar in a really recognizable way that I understood. That just it wasn't kind of about academia. It wasn't. Um, uh, yeah, it wasn't about a monastic life. You know, some of the colleges are like that. It was about learning the basics of how to be a vicar. And also they gave out free toast in the common room.
That ain't nothing.
And I don't think I ate the free toast the whole 3 years that I lived there. But I was like, people who think it's important to have toast available at all times.
These are good
they're
people.
Like, these are my people.
Yeah.
They just, yeah. So
no evil people in history gave away free toast. I think that we can for certain. Yeah.
It was just really, really friendly. And most people lived on campus. Oh, that's not true. Most of the young people lived on campus. And so there was a really strong community. You prayed together, you lived together, you studied together. And that was a really incredible experience. I think living in Christian community for 3 years, with 100 other people training to be clergy, and then all their spouses and children, like you really get a sense of what the epistles are about, I think, when you live in Christian community. And so that was a really amazing experience, but I hadn't realized how much it would kind of brand me, because the aforementioned village, Christian identity, I didn't really know. I wasn't really clued up with the way that then you kind of like drag that with you. And sometimes people see where I went to college and they raise their eyebrows, particularly because it became much more conservative about a decade later. And then I did curacy in a high church Anglican rural setting in a market town, and 11 churches around it, in South Shropshire. And then I went into chaplaincy, and really the big thing for me wasn't about what wing of the church. It wasn't about progressive versus conservative theology. The big vocational thing for me that kind of happened after ordination was a calling into education, that realizing that God transforms people through education, through all kinds of education, and it's miraculous and beautiful, and being there in amongst it and getting to sometimes name God within that context is an incredible thing. And so then chaplaincy, then I did some teaching clergy, and running training for them for 8 years, and then I came to SCM.
You and I have spoken a little bit about the SCM part of your journey, and something that really stood out for me was just how, while SCM is a very progressive organization and other organizations are available, you aren't down on conservatives themselves. You don't jump at every opportunity to kind of kick them. There was just a discussion we had that I just found really fascinating about what we can learn from conservatives, or what they do right, the good things about them that perhaps you don't hear in circles like this show, maybe, or I don't know. Do you want to share some thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's one of the things I think that hurts when you're rejected from a group of people that you really love. Because I think that, like we could list the faults of that wing of the church, but I would take the immediate loving generosity of a conservative any day of the week. That how often, like, I think about, like, I remember one particular meeting that I had with somebody who, like, I literally just met her, and she came from a conservative organization and was wanting, I think, didn't really know what SCM was, saw a student, wanted to reach out, and and we met and had a cup of coffee, and we were just about to be moving house, and it was when there was a petrol crisis going on, and diesel as well, and our removal van fell through, and she was like. She lived like somewhere hours away from me, but she was like, we could come back on Thursday. Like, we could borrow a van from our friend so-and-so. Like, she was prepared to immediately put herself in a place of coming and helping me. I mean, it wasn't necessary, but it was that instinct to meet. That's why they put up signs saying all are welcome. It's not mean to trick people. You really want to gather everybody to them. It's a really, really beautiful thing. And actually, there's also something like that. There is a layer of the theology of rejection and hurt, which comes from a place. It doesn't all come from a good place. That would be really, really fanciful. But some of it comes from a place of, I want to look after you. If you're genuinely worried somebody's going to go to hell, then actually trying to get them into your lifeboat is a incredibly noble thing. The problem is they need to stop and listen to you. I'm like, do you know what? I'm fine. I'm actually standing on my own dry land.
Yeah.
And you need to listen to me about that. And there's a conversation about consent we could really do with having. But that impulse to rescue people and to look after them and to put your own body in a difficult place to be there for the other person, that does not come from a bad place. It comes from a really good place. They're also really generous financially. And I will say that that conservatives are great at funding their youth organizations. And when I arrived at SCM, we had one church who were giving to us on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And the previous year's giving was less than £100 a year. In comparison to the way that conservatives fund their youth organizations, it's really easy for us to moan about how big and powerful and how our children get scooped up at moments like universities and so on by churches and organizations who are from a different brand of theology to their parents. Well, but are their parents giving to the organizations are their churches. And you know, and when you have that conversation with a progressive, they were like, okay, that's actually fair enough.
Yeah.
And you can have a good conversation about that. And we're now, you know, we're now a lot more than one church giving us. But you have to have that conversation because culturally, conservatives are really great at putting their money where their mouth is. And, you know, from a purely kind of budgetary point of view, I have to really admire that.
That's really interesting. I don't know if a question will emerge at the end of this thought, but it's just interesting to wrestle through these ideas because it's like as someone who grew up in that conservative environment and went to uni through that conservative environment and was president of the Christian Union in that conservative environment, then like you have a great impetus. It was a small uni, it was a rubbish uni, so it's not that impressive.
Name the uni.
Name drop.
They've rebranded actually because it was Napier University. So it's like, you know how a city like Edinburgh, you know, they have proper unis and then the wee rubbish one.
Oh, you went
like
to Edinburgh University?
Well, no, Napier. And so they've since rebranded since I left as Edinburgh Napier.
Nice.
So like
that was a good move on their part.
Like Oxford Brooks.
Oxford Brooks.
That you can just drop the end bit off.
Yeah.
Cambridge Analytica. No, wait, that's a different thing.
Anywho, yeah, it seems from the conservative perspective, you have this like the dangers of hellfire to motivate people to either attend, you know, get properly stuck in, and also give. And yeah, how did we as progressives do that? Because it's something I wrestle with at my own church that I very rarely attend. But that's such a relief to me and my family of like, you don't need to be there the whole time. Like you can come and go. There's not a huge guilt trip about getting stuck in and getting involved and giving. But the numbers seem to suffer because of that. Is that your experience?
That is absolutely true. And I think that, so SEM, in the kind of immediately post-war era, SEM, I can't remember the exact statistics, but it was something like 90% of all students were members of SEM. I mean, that sounds very impressive. Of course, there are a lot fewer students than there are nowadays, but nevertheless, it was, you know, it was completely mainstream, and being a Christian was completely mainstream. And then the 60s happened, and the thing that happened in the 60s with progressive Christianity, I'm just going to say I wasn't there. But as far as I can understand, that there was a very kind of strong kind of rejection of the church. And its kind of established forms and its restrictions, and a feeling that like, well, actually what matters is the faith into action. So therefore, I'm going to go and be a Christian social worker, and I'm not going to go to church anymore. But then, of course, what happened very quickly was that people were just social workers who used to be Christians. And that didn't happen to everybody who went and did. But the whole kind of taking the whole Bonhoeffer religionless Christianity to the kind of extreme of no longer being part of the community. And I have to say, I'm a really big fan of Stanley Hauerwas. And although like, in so many ways, we are very different kinds of theologians. I mean, apart from anything else, he's a very famous one. But he talks so passionately about the importance of the community of faith, and I think that what we have to be really careful that we are not the same shape, the same sort of form as a conservative church, but just with progressive values and progressive teaching. Because actually, what holds us together isn't not hell, it is love. And so the way that love is expressed in the church is through community. And so rather than thinking, oh, I'm going to have better big service, that we're going to have the same kind of student outreach, we're going to have the same music and sound system, and we're going to have and we're going to have the same kind of shape. I can't think of a better way of saying it than that. And it's just we're going to preach different theology. The thing is that the churches that set up like that very often fail, because they're shaping themselves after something that isn't who they are, and what holds us together. The thing is that you could go to that and it's like, oh, that's nice, but it doesn't have its own authenticity. And I think that, for me, I mean, and I run a small progressive church, so I guess, it's important, content warning, I would say this, wouldn't I? That I think being orientated towards the community, which then expresses itself in worship, rather than a worship gathering that then you hope that community will sort of accidentally come out of. It doesn't work like that unless you've got that strong teaching telling you you've got to come and keeping you in that discipline. The discipline just comes from a different place. And I think for conservatives, the discipline comes from love. But love's hard work, and you have to keep putting the time into it. And I think when we do that, our churches really thrive. But when we go after it's that kind of, desire to be popular and to do what you see other people doing and doing really well, or really I hate to use the word success about church, but it's used by denominations a lot, and so there's a lot of pressure on church leadership to make their churches as successful, and so then they try and do it in the ways that don't belong to their own tradition.
Which is funny. Sorry, I'm just going to sneak in, Jonty, and be rude. I was just going to tag on there, and now I can't remember what I was going to say. I've got it. Everyone calm down.
He's a professional.
I'm a professional.
Bated breath here.
Yeah. Well, there's just an accusation often leveled at progressives that you've kind of abandoned your values to kind of seek the approval of quote unquote the world and therefore success, But actually, if you're going for a numbers game, then you want that conservative chat, and you want the kind of to match those mega churches, don't you? And the big worship bands and all that kind of stuff.
I just feel like, as somebody who really likes the big worship things, when you said, there's these progressive churches that decide they want to do the big worship stuff, I'm like, fucking where? Because I want one. Because the church that I like to go to is, slightly, more anonymous, and the worship band are very good at what they do, and I find that less distracting. I think probably because that's how I came to faith, and I guess that question is facetious. What's less facetious is the idea that, could we be replicating other things or other shapes of being church, like shibboleths of belonging, like purity tests, like that kind of stuff? How much of that is a danger actually in progressive churches, or is that just a kind of evangelical boogeyman? Boogeyman? That's the most... Sorry.
I'm going to answer the first bit, and then I think I've got a question. I think I don't completely understand the second bit, but I'm going to ask the first bit first. So I think in terms of where are they, there are, of course, increasingly evangelical inclusive churches, and I was preaching at one last night, we get so in my diocese there's a progressive WhatsApp group that forever people are popping a message in saying, I've got moving to this part of the diocese. They want to go somewhere that's affirming with drums.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, and there are not as many of those churches as widespread as people would like. They're very often people who have migrated from the conservative churches and are looking for the same worship experience, but accommodating the theology that they've grown into. And those churches are increasingly emerging. And the one that I was preaching at last night, shout out to St Mark's Leamington Spa, they do a kind of fifth Sunday gathered worship for people across the whole area who are missing that kind of big sing, but in a safe environment. I think the ones that I've known fail. As somebody was, because we run a fresh expression that's been going now 7 years, and and my partner's written a book about it, and because we've reached a self-sustaining financial position, people come and look at us, um, and there are very few central Anglican pioneer churches. So anyway, so people come and look at us. Somebody who came recently was telling us quite a prolonged story about a church in London that had a huge amount of funding to set up, and folded within 2 years. And the whole model was, well, we'll do the HTB thing, but without the conservative theology. And I'm sure that was really heartbreaking to be a part of. And then I'm also thinking of Rachel Held Evans Searching for Sunday, also doing the same thing. So those are not examples that I have had any lived experience of. But the really interesting thing with Searching for Sunday, the Rachel Held Evans book, she talks about how their church failed. I think by the end of their church, they had 30 people coming to worship on a Sunday. I don't think a community of 30 people worshiping is a failure. It's only a failure if you think what you're supposed to be is bigger than that.
Yeah.
That actually the early church, 30 people meeting in a room wasn't a failure. It was a community. And I think that if actually you've got a theology which is really focused on really paying attention to people's questions, really paying attention to people's safety and their brokenness, and the way that the world rejects them. The thing is, you have to give them a huge amount of time. And there are churches that can systematize that in a kind of programmatic way. But most of the time, Christians are good at doing that when they know each other, and mostly you know each other if you're small, and so our church is intentionally small because that's the way that we see it function, that love for one another function, and the community kind of build up through the bonds between people, and I think that you can't just scale that up automatically. It's just a different thing. Like a family meeting for a wedding is a different kind of occasion to a family meeting for Sunday lunch. It's just a different thing. It's not that one's better than the other even, or that one is more authentic than the other. You're just doing a different thing, and you're going to have a different experience, even if some of it has got some of the same kind of material in it. So I personally, I think that we should stop trying to. Now, the risk, of course, is that what you lose is the big thing, which is, if that's part of your kind of faith nurturing story, then it's a loss. And so then maybe we do need to have events that people can go to get. And that is a problem. But that's only one dimension of the spiritual life, and I think we need to be really committed to small church. But of course, the reason that you can't be is because of the capitalist model about and actually it needs to be financially successful. If we took our church needs to be big enough to pay for its own ministry. If we took that out of the equation, what do we think church should look like? But we're so used to, certainly in the mainstream denominations, thinking our church model has to sustain paying for a clergy person. And nowadays we pay our clergy very reasonably. It's worked when people had more disposable income, and the clergy would pay peanuts. But the reality is that everything's more expensive than it used to be, and that's really financially really, really hard. we fund our ministry largely through entrepreneurial activity. Like, so we have a shop, and both of bricks and mortar and online, and work really, really hard at that. And that's what brings in our money. And I think we have to get really honest about the financial background. It's got nothing to do with theology or worship style on the whole. The size of a successful church is really determined by whether it's financially viable. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought it up because I've been really thinking recently about kind of how we can make church more kind of that kind of community vibe that you would find in kind of like the activist left that of kind of days gone by, I guess, also nowadays. But thinking about what I want out of church, I want to go somewhere where there's mutual aid, where I can have people help pay my rent if I can't pay my rent, where I can get a good meal or toast whenever I want to, and like that sort of thing. And I don't see, while I see inclusive churches, I don't necessarily see them being that. I think
Yeah.
I see them, kind of trying to kind of copy the model of what kind of the HDBs and whatever are doing, but not necessarily quite achieving it. And yeah, just like, do you think it is time for the kind of inclusive churches to kind of be like, I don't know. I don't know if we want to call it a failure of kind of because I don't think it's a failure, but like, is it time for like churches to kind of say like, like political landscape being what it is, we're not achieving what we could be achieving. Do we need to just redo the whole system?
Let's just do it differently.
Yeah.
There was a really interesting blog, where somebody came up with. I'm really sorry, I don't know the name of the woman who wrote it, but it was published on a blog by a guy called Al Barrett, and her blog was about launching the idea of an anti-growth coalition, and she called out some of the kind of stuff that we've been talking about, and in particular the drive from denominational hierarchy, grow, and I certainly used to find when I was running training for clergy that making them talk endlessly about growth, where what they're experiencing is either stagnation or decline. And I say stagnation. We were in ordinary parish ministry for a really long time, and the first two or 3 years, I forget, that Charlotte was vicar in our last parish, she buried 50 of the usual Sunday congregation. I mean, they had died. She did just bury them. I'm so sorry. It felt like such a harsh thing to say. I needed to make a joke, and then the joke was in poor taste. I'm so sorry. Yeah, and so actually the fact that the numbers stayed fairly static means you're really growing. Like, if you count the people in glory, then then your church is huge. But that's a reality. That holding fast should not be something to be ashamed of. But clergy are beaten over the head, certainly in the Anglican Church, with feeling they're not good enough if they're not growing, and I think really what this blog was about is just like, stop. We just have to stop. We have to be honest about this. And then what good things happen? Because if you then let church leaders talk about what they're really experiencing, you get all of this kind of extraordinary theological wisdom. You get their excitement about what really is, what they're really seeing. And I think we should set them free and let them be leaders. They're called to be in the church now, and the church now is shrinking. So if we let them really do their theological reflection on what they're actually experiencing, what might God be saying? And it could be really, really exciting. I think that being prepared to talk about the money is really, really important. But I also think that then when you are small, so we don't like talking about numbers because it's playing into all of that, but I will because it feels relevant to the conversation. So we're kind of 20 on a Sunday, on the whole community's maybe 40 people, and my very favorite thing to do, as a chatty person, is a kind of the moment after the service. Everybody stays for lunch after the service, and by this point, people are kind of coming into the shop, and like, because there is nothing that makes people want to shop like telling them it's closed. And so during worship, we're like, no, we're closed. But then afterwards, we're like, oh, okay, right, yeah, okay, cool, you can come in and browse. So they're browsing, and people are having food, and some people will nip out to Greg's and they'll get a sausage roll or whatever, and come back, and they're just all talking to each other, and um and these are like a bunch of people who are, a lot of them arrived with really complicated stories, like we know so well, from particularly young progressive Christians, often come with such wounds, and here they are loving each other and planning stuff like, I think one of them got an allotment and then was horrified. They were from somewhere else in Europe, and they didn't know that thing that a British person would know, that is that, like, if you get an allotment really quickly, it's gonna be it's going to be overgrown. It's going to be full of rubbish. You're going to need a skip to clear it. And so they were just really, really just mortified. And the church just turned up the next Saturday and just cleared it. And it was just such a beautiful thing. And it wasn't like, we are going to do a mission outreach thing. It was just because you can, and you want to help each other because these are your people. And that's what they're like with each other, and I love just sitting and watching that happen, and watching the way they welcome the newcomer, and particularly because people often come in kind of slightly shaky. They're daring to come to church for the first time in a long time, and they're daring, and then they're welcomed, but then they get to really form relationships with those people. And I think if we let ourselves do that, I think the progressive church is amazing at that. So let's just be that.
Nice. We have forgotten to be Beer Christianity by talking about what we're drinking, which is something that happens fairly regularly, possibly because we're drinking. What's everybody drinking? Naomi, what are you drinking?
So I've been doing dry January for the first time ever in my life. So I have had a hot chocolate, but I also have fizzy water.
Nice. Ooh. That actually sounds lovely.
I don't know how I feel about that combination, I'll be honest.
You never had a fizzy chocolate water,
We're going to be talking
Laura?
for ages. But, and I had my hot chocolate at the beginning, but I'm like, then by an hour.
Then okay, you've gone hot chocolate, then moved on to the fizzy water.
It's like this.
Right, that
and then they mix in your stomach.
I was expecting like a carbonation and then a hot chocolate. That is weird to me. But I'm glad you've done it the normal way. So that's okay.
She said in her most neurodivergent way. Those textures do not belong together. It is wrong. Love it. Laura, what you drinking?
I'm on the old classic. I've got Jack Daniels and Coke.
Nice.
Well, actually, it's a Jack Daniels and Pepsi that the astute people on this call might have seen me necking about 20 minutes ago. But yeah, it's good.
I never understood the people have an opinion about Coke or Pepsi.
No, they're the same. They're the exact same. I think. Do you know what? I think Diet Coke, Coke Zero, and regular Coke are all the same.
Like, is anyone ever at a bar, if you go like, oh, a Jack and Coke, oh, we've only got Pepsi, leave it.
I have
mate.
seen people do that. They'll be like,
really? I want to do that, but
insane.
I want the bar person to like me the most and to think that I was the best customer that evening. So I'll say, sure, that's fine. But Pepsi is shit, guys. I mean, to be fair, I'm not going to be ordering Coke because we're boycotting Coke forever now. So, nobody's drinking Coke, obviously.
No, obviously not.
Progressives do know how to hurt themselves, don't we?
Yeah.
The stuff we've given up over the years.
Yeah. Hey, you're on dry January. Speaking of, Malky, what non-alcoholic drink are you drinking?
I'm drinking Lef Zero, which I may have been drinking the last time. I mean, not the same actual drink.
Been out on the side, warm and flat.
It's my favourite non-alcoholic beer at the moment. Lef Zero.
Nice.
What about you, John T?
I am drinking JC Leroux Sauvignon Blanc Sparkling because it's like Prosecco, but I'm in South Africa, the land of cheap, excellent wine. So, it's not expensive. It's really rather nice. It's kind of nicer than most Prosecco. I polished off most of a bottle with my parents earlier this evening, so I'm trying to drink quite slowly on this call because, I'm only one man.
So Naomi's doing dry January, so you're drinking for two.
I'm drinking for two now.
I really appreciate your sacrifice.
Thank you so much.
You really did it by accident. It
just it just happens. It's a thing.
I don't know.
I wanted to ask you, we're probably running out of time coming up to, but I wanted to ask you a thing about SCM has got a resource out that includes a progressive way to do evangelism, because it feels like there's some areas that conservatives own and don't need to. If you want to tell us a little bit about that, just generally, and also about the resource.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I really feel really passionately about what you just said, that that there aren't certain features of the Christian life that just belong to one tribe or another, and I think that cuts in all directions. But evangelism is absolutely one of them. So we have a series of courses that SCM launched last year, called Affirming Christianity, which is basically small group resources starting from a point of view of, we already probably agree about affirming LGBTQ plus people, feminism, anti-racism, climate change. These things we're already on board with. These courses are not about convincing you to be that. But if you already agree about those things, where is your discipleship? Kind of you want to learn from that, and onward from that, and really resourcing a church for a future which is convinced in its anti-racism and its affirmation and so on and so forth. So that's the kind of vision for the whole suite of courses. And we've just launched Progressive Evangelism, and it really is that idea that evangelism doesn't belong solely to conservative evangelicals. And they have their way of doing it, and absolutely good for them, crack on. But actually progressives also really love Jesus and really think their faith is a wonderful thing. So even when we're feeling filled with doubt, then actually we still think it's worth talking about. And but we're really shy of the word evangelism, and often that's, it comes from various sources, but certainly one of them is from being traumatized by seeing it done in a way that doesn't reflect our values, or being forced to do it in a way that doesn't reflect our values, or that we've seen people really, really hurt by. There's also the whole kind of legacy of colonialism, challenge with how to think about evangelism. So the first week of the course is just even asking the question, is this something we should be doing? And what would progressive evangelism look like? And that's really this is not a resource that tells you the answers. It's a resource that helps you think about the questions. So there's a week on that. There's a week on thinking about what the gospel is to us, and we do that through thinking about the Easter story and remembering it. And there's this beautiful book called Word of Mouth that I was telling Jonty about on a previous call, which talks about the remembered Bible. And we use this concept of the remembered Bible to get into the Easter story and really think about what it is in the Easter story that really touches our hearts. Not so that we can go and tell people on a train, let me tell you about this bit of the passion narrative and why it really speaks to me, but so that when people do ask us questions, we have instead of flipping to scripts we were taught and we don't feel comfortable with, that actually feeling an inner sense of being really confident about where's the gospel really located for us. And so we express it, and sometimes we might express it in actually talking about those theologies, but sometimes it might just be about the way that those theologies around the cross inform the way that we are with people. So that's another week. Then obviously there's one about the way that we do evangelism through action, which is that's the obvious progressive bread and butter for doing evangelism. Use words if necessary, kind of vibe. And it's really lovely that when you do that with a group, then they get into like, we actually do evangelism a lot. And they kind of start the course thinking it's not something they really engage in. And then there's a week I'm thinking about what is it that draws people to Christianity? That, like, rather than us kind of like not wanting to press it on people, let's actually engage with when we talk to friends and they find, if people find out, or work colleagues or so on, they find out that we're a Christian, what's bit they're interested in, or even if it's not about our own faith, if it's just seeing about what people are searching for and reaching for, to try and help people to engage with what is it that people are seeking in God, and kind of helping us to think about the person on the other end of the conversation or the social action or whatever it might be, and about what connection it is that they're looking for. I really love, my favorite verse in the Bible is Acts 17:27. So that they might reach out for God, even though he was already there, at the temple of the unknown God, altar of the unknown God, and that says, that God is all around people and they are reaching for him, and I find that a really interesting idea, and so that really informs that last session. Sorry, I probably talked about that way too much. You just said we were running out of time, and then I talked loads about a resource I'm really excited about. I'm really sorry.
That's awesome. It sounds awesome. Is it specifically designed for students? Do you think other people could make use of it, or?
No, it's deliberately designed to be really open, that it will work for either for student groups or for church groups.
Nice.
And actually, thus far we've only tested it with church groups. Actually, it occurs to me. So, like, let's hope the students like it. The students have co-written it, so that should help.
I'm sure it will.
That sounds fantastic. Where can people find out more about SEM and about the resources and the campaigns that you're running at the moment?
So obviously we have a website, which is movement.org.uk. Assuming I've just said that right.
We'll put a link in the description as well.
Thank you so much, just in case I was wrong. And you don't do that, do you? Like with your own website, like you just click on the button.
I cannot tell you how many times I've got the email address for this podcast wrong. So Laura's just checked with me.
I've also just Googled it and can confirm it is movement.org.uk.
No, thank you so much. But also our socials. So we have an amazing comms officer and student lead on comms who create some really brilliant content. So we're just coming off Twitter, but Blue Sky and Instagram and TikTok and Facebook, but probably Instagram is our is the current natural home, and so all of those, and we're SEM Britain on all of those.
Great. Naomi, thank you so much for taking the time. It's been brought. There's so many other things I want to talk to you about, so we're going to have you back at some point. So
great. And it won't be January, and I can drink.
Yeah, you can be absolutely smashed.
That's bad, isn't it? That the first thing I was thinking is like, I can have a drink. Obviously, the most important thing is the more theology there is to talk about. That's
absolutely. That stuff. Fantastic. You can also find out what kind of books Naomi likes and reads in the next issue of Shibboleth magazine, because Shelf Expression features Naomi as the featured person whose bookshelves have been opened to the public in a way. That sounds like with the National Trust.
I mean, they're very welcome to have a little ticket person like at my front door, and people can come and look at my green bookshelves.
A tour guide that just kind of hovers in the corner and just like grabs people as they come through, just quite aggressively to
Yeah.
get them through it. Yeah.
Absolutely. So would you like National Trust membership?
Absolutely. Would you like
really
to support
aggressive way.
SCM financially?
Yes. I'll need to do that side brief. It was a really fun thing to do, that interview, though. Like, thank you for asking me to do it. It was really fun.
I'm so glad. Well, if you want to read Naomi's piece, then you can go to shibbolethmag.com. Melky, shibbolethmag.com. Yeah, it is.
Yes, that's
And confirm.
Yeah.
Excellent. Check out issue 2. You can also check out issue 1 of Shibboleth magazine. We're putting together issue 2 at the moment, and we're terribly excited about it. You can find out more about Bare Christianity at barechristianity.co.uk. You can find us on most socials. I'm not sure if we're on Twitter anymore because we stopped posting there, and I think I may have had my accounts deleted. So that would check out based on what I've been posting, and that's just not Elon friendly, really. So, but
Go
maybe
and have a look and confirm for us.
write to us at barechristianity@yahoo.com, and tell us if we're still on Twitter or not. But anyway, yes, check us out there. We'll be back soon with interesting stuff. We've got an interview with Dan McClellan that will come out at the same time as the next issue of Shibboleth. And we've got some interesting stuff about a conference coming up soon. So we'll be doing that as well with you. So stay tuned, however, whatever the hell that means of the podcast. And Naomi, thanks so much for joining us.
Bye.
Bye.